Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Cami. Thank you so much for kicking it with me today. If you haven't been here before, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today I will be discussing another crime story from my hometown of Jackson, Michigan. I always want to start out by mentioning that by telling these stories, I in no way want or intend to inflict any more emotional trauma to the victims. And also all the information that I'm discussing, I've retrieved from old newspaper articles, Google searches, or social media posts. Everything that I'm discussing is public information. That being said, let's go ahead and dive right into today's story. I want to start off by telling you about the victim, Miss Izora Smith. I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. I don't know if it's Izora or Izora Smith, but from here on out, I'll just refer to her as Miss Smith. I'm just going to go ahead and read directly from her obituary that I found online to give you some background information about her. Miss Smith was born on June 5th, 1910. In Golden Lake, Arkansas, to her parents Julia and William Birch. She was known as a kind, loving person and a devoted mother. She moved to Jackson, Michigan in 1937. She was an employee of L.H. Field's department store, and later she married her husband, Mr. Ovis Smith, who preceded her in death. Miss Smith was a loyal warrior of Christ and a missionary who dedicated her service to her church in any way she was needed. She attended Second Baptist Church for 66 years, serving on the missionary board, and was a former member of the pastor's chorus. Miss Smith taught her children to stay and trust in the Lord, be loving and kind to everybody we meet, and to always do unto others as you would have them do unto you. She was also an avid housekeeper who loved to cook and sew, but was passionate about buying and wearing pretty hats and clothes. She loved to talk about Jesus and how good he had been to her down through the years. She was the mother of 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys, grandmother of 30, great-grandmother of 47, and great-great-grandmother to 12. She loved all of her family dearly and left a positive Christian example that will live on forever. So why are we talking about Miss Smith today? Well, those 47 great-grandchildren, one of them did the unthinkable. Imagine living to the ripe old age of 95. And of course, being 95, just as life goes, your body is not as strong as it was back when you were 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or even 80. And because you're so independent, you refuse to live with anyone. So she was living in independent housing. And she, like us all, was probably planning to pass away as a result of natural causes. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. So let's talk about her killer. Of her 47 great-grandchildren, she had a great-granddaughter named Latanya Fowler, also sometimes referred to as Latanya Brown. Latanya was an unemployed single mother to 5 children who had a history of, as we would call it today, scamming. She was a scammer. Prior to her murdering her great-grandmother, she had been charged with and convicted of both forgery and larceny from a person. And I believe she served prison time for that. But obviously, she continued doing what she was doing, and that's why I'm talking to you today. Apparently, some of her family members believed she was stealing from Miss Smith. And it sounds like she was running up like credit cards and scamming. She was scamming. So on the morning of November 8, 2005, Latanya went to her great-grandmother's house. I don't know what the reason for the visit was, but while she was there, Miss Smith questioned her about the rumors and the accusations against her. According to Latanya, her 95-year-old grandmother then took a glass and swung it at her. Now, because of that, Latanya was so scared, she defended herself by then taking the glass from her great-grandmother and hitting her with it. And she hit her repeatedly. Miss Smith ultimately died of blunt force trauma. The autopsy pictures were so gruesome. During the trial, the judge was trying to figure out, she was so covered in blood, the judge was trying to figure out what part of her head they were looking at when they were showing photographs. So let me go back to November 8th. After she did that, she didn't try to render aid to her grandmother. She didn't try to call, 911 to see if she can get her some help. What she did was she went and she changed her clothes, put her bloody clothes in a bag, and left. A neighbor saw her leave at about 12:30 p.m. that day. Shortly after that, a friend was coming by to visit Miss Smith and found her in a pool of blood, called the police. Now, Latanya's mistake is she had left her keys at her grandmother's house. And so they were able to apprehend her, with the help of the neighbor, and the neighbor saying, hey, I saw her granddaughter here. They were able to apprehend her quite quickly. The police ended up arresting her in the parking lot of a Kmart not too far from her grandmother's apartment. Following her arrest, she was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree premeditated homicide. She was held without bail in the Jackson County Jail. During the course of their investigation, the bag of bloody clothes that I mentioned earlier, the police ended up finding that in a vehicle that was linked to Latanya. The following August, Latanya went on trial for her great-grandmother's murder, and more details obviously came out during that time. According to a scientist that the prosecution had hired, they determined that Miss Smith died while sitting in her wingback chair, and she was pummeled to death. They also found that her throat was slashed, but that was not determined to be the cause of her death. The medical examiner had taken pictures of Miss Smith's hands, and they were full of defensive wounds. According to the forensic scientists, impact splatter on the wall and the chair also indicated that Miss Smith was sitting down when she was attacked. When Latanya's attorney was arguing for second-degree murder or manslaughter instead of the first-degree murder, he pointed out that the forensic pathologist ultimately concluded that Miss Smith passed away as a result of a heart attack. And because of that, he was arguing that his client didn't directly cause Miss Smith's death. However, side note, if she wouldn't have went over there and beat her, she wouldn't have had the heart attack. But I digress. The pathologist for the defense testified, and I quote, she had a 95-year-old heart that looked like it had that much mileage. He went on to say that arrhythmia brought on by the shock and perhaps fright and subtle anxiety and even pain of the attack is what caused her to have the heart attack and then pass away. Okay. He made it a point to say that she just had a really bad heart. He also went on to say that her coronary arteries were plugged up to 95%. She had an enlarged heart, and she also suffered from congestive heart failure. Because of this, the defense attorney motioned for the judge during trial to drop the first-degree murder charge and allow the jury to decide on manslaughter or second-degree murder. The judge said no, as he should. The judge said that between those blows, the defendant had the opportunity to deliberate and decide whether or not to continue hitting her grandmother, and he believed that her actions met the criteria for a first-degree murder charge. During trial, the detective played audio from her interview following her arrest, and Latanya admitted to striking her grandmother. She had told the detective that it hurt her feelings that her grandmother had accused her of stealing from her. In an initial interview, she told the detective that she only remembered hitting her grandmother like once. Then she went on to admit that she hit her, then she hit her again, and the second time that she had hit her, the glass had broken over her head, but they determined that she hit her even more than that. Also, she admitted that when she changed her clothes and took her bloodied clothes out of her grandmother's house in a bag, she also stole her grandmother's purse. So after her grandmother accused her of stealing, she killed her, changed her clothes, put her bloody clothes in a bag, stole her grandmother's purse, walked out the apartment, and then left her grandmother's bloodied body for a friend to find. Initially, LaTanya said that she was going to testify in her trial, but when the time came, she decided against that, which from a legal standpoint is probably the only smart thing that she did. Despite her attorney arguing that his client, LaTanya Fowler, was not a cold-blooded killer, the jury of 8 men and 4 women ended up deliberating for 7 hours. Afterwards, the jury foreman told the media that much of that 7 hours was spent deciding between first-degree and second-degree murder. Ultimately, they found her guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. Prior to her sentencing on October 5th, 2006, the judge noted that we don't even see this type of brutality amongst strangers. And because of this brutality, the judge ended up sentencing her to life in prison. So you would probably think that this is the end of the story, but it's not. As I discussed in my video last week, I've been thinking about doing this channel of crime stories from Jackson, Michigan for quite some time. So I've researched and I've looked up stories for quite some time. I didn't really do a deep dive or anything about it, but I knew what LaTanya Fowler looked like because I had looked her up on the Michigan Department of Corrections website. I'd seen her charges, I'd seen her picture, all of that. So last month, I'm scrolling through Facebook, and guess who pops up in my people you may know? I immediately went on MDOC's Otis website and it said she had been paroled. They paroled her on March 10th of this year, 2026. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought she was sentenced to life. It literally says her minimum sentence is life and her maximum sentence is life. So how she's out and about with a social media, I don't quite understand. I guess it was life with the possibility of parole, but nowhere during my research did it ever say anything about the possibility of parole. It said the judge gave her life and she was going to be in there for life. I don't know. Upon doing further research, I found a notice that the Michigan Parole Board held a public hearing on December 9th, 2025 to consider possible parole of LaTanya Fowler, prisoner number 403516. In the notice, it has the following blurb. LaTanya Fowler was sentenced to a term of life for the crime of murder second degree, and she was sentenced on October 5th, 2005 out of Jackson County. Apparently, when she went to the parole board in December, they chose to grant her parole. Anyways, her page is public. You guys can go check it out. It looks like she's been visiting with family and having a good old time. It also looks like she's become an advocate for the treatment of women at Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan, which is the only women's prison in Michigan. If you go to prison in Michigan and you're a woman, you're going to Huron Valley. I believe there's been multiple lawsuits about the condition of the prisoners there, which is unfortunate. I feel if you get locked up, we're in America. I mean, it's not going to be fun, but you also shouldn't deal with any sort of abuse. You shouldn't deal with a moldy facility or anything like that. The prisons get plenty of money to make sure that the conditions are at least livable. However, if she wouldn't have killed her grandmother, she wouldn't have been there. I do recognize that there are people locked up in prison. There are innocent people locked up in prison. They are absolutely innocent people locked up in prison. But better decisions also produce better outcomes. And I don't know, maybe this is her way of making up for the wrong that she's done. All that being said, her grandmother is still in the grave as a result of her actions. She ultimately served about 20 something years for the murder, and she's out and about at the young age of 54. And I don't know. I don't want to make this about the perpetrator. This is more about Miss Smith. Obviously, at the age of 95, likely she wouldn't still be alive today, but she also wouldn't have gone the way she did had it not been for the actions of her great granddaughter. Miss Smith's online obituary noted that at the age of 95, she finished her life's journey and walked through heaven's gates. Miss Smith, I know for certain heaven is treating you kind. Thank you so much, everyone, for kicking it with me again today. I hope to see you again here next week as I tell another crime story from Jackson, Michigan. If you haven't already, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to tell a friend or two or three or four or five.